Morning, ACC. Thank you, Juan and worship team, for leading us out in worship this morning. Ever found yourself in one of those awkward situations? One of those situations where you posed a question and it doesn't seem to matter which way you answered, that it's going to be the wrong answer? There's no way of answering that without kind of implicating yourself. Two friends have a falling out, and one asks you whose side you're taking. Taking a side can damage the relationship with the other friendship. Staying Switzerland and being neutral can be perceived as not being very faithful, not being a very faithful, loyal friend. Your church staying faithful or just trying to be relevant? Staying faithful may be perceived as being somewhat rigid and out of touch. Trying to be relevant is code language for compromising truth and caving into the culture. Sometimes we just find those situations where it seems you can't answer without getting in trouble. This feels so vulnerable. That's where we find Jesus this morning. He's going to be confronted with a question, and it seems like he's in this proverbial between a rock and a hard place. How's he going to answer that? Seemingly trapped with whatever answer that he gives. Last week we considered the last of, Steve led us through the last of three parables in this particular section of Matthew's Gospel, where Jesus has been addressing the religious leaders and challenging them on their refusal to repent and enter into the kingdom of heaven. And as we come to our passage this morning, there's another transition that will lead us into four confrontations, four exchanges that Jesus is going to make with some of the religious leaders in Judaism. Each of these leaders, each of these groups have their own agendas, have their own biases, but together they are opposed in the claims that Jesus has been making that indeed he is the Messiah. In the broader picture, remember in this section that we're in the final week of Jesus' ministry prior to the cross. And so these will be the last public debates that we have in Jesus' earthly ministry leading up to the cross. And just so that we can get to the punchline, if you will, none of these end well. And it comes to a climax in chapter 23 where we have the great series of woe judgments that Jesus pronounces upon these leaders. But we're getting a window into their consistent, continuing opposition to Jesus and his claims. Like we said, this is the last week of Jesus' ministry. We believe that these four exchanges take place on the Tuesday. That means that in less than 3 days, Jesus is going to be standing before the religious leaders, not engaged in public debate, but standing on trial for his life. Like we are getting near the end. And so our focus this morning is taken up with the first of these four exchanges, which Juan has read for us here in chapter 22. So let's go back to our text, and we'll pick it up in verse 15. And it's here where the author, and we're going to see this periodically, that the author, the narrator, kind of pulls back the curtain, gives us some inside glimpses. This starts here in our opening verse, where he gives us this detail concerning what is the motivation that characterizes these particular leaders. What is it that's going on in their hearts, in the hearts of the Pharisees? And it's their desire to trip Jesus up in his words. The Pharisees went and plotted how to entangle him in his words. This actually takes us back by way of connection to verse 45, the second last verse of the previous chapter, where Jesus has been giving this parable, and verse 45 says, when the chief priests and the Pharisees heard his parables, they perceived that he was speaking about them. Jesus tells these parables that are designed to to just kind of lower the temperature and lower everybody's resistance. And then when you have everybody sitting on the edge of their seat, he just gives you the punchline. And Jesus has been telling these parables, and the Pharisees say to themselves, he's talking about us. That's not so much fun. But the challenge was that some of the other people listening, they kind of thought it was fun. They kind of liked what Jesus was doing to them. And so they want to do something with him, but they fear the crowds, and so they have to come up with another plan. And so here we are in verse 15 as they are hatching their plan. They are regrouping here in verses 15 through 16. And verse 16 says that the Pharisees sent their disciples to him, that is, to Jesus, along with the Herodians. Now, it's not a new thing for the Pharisees to want to trip Jesus up, to embarrass him in some way, to expose him in order to undermine his credibility. That's not new. But what is noteworthy on this particular occasion is the cooperation between these Pharisees and the Herodians. And verse 16 in particular references the disciples of the Pharisees. Just who are these disciples? One commentator refers to them as Pharisee flunkies. I'm not sure that's fair, but the phrase does indicate that these are not full-fledged experts, legal experts, fully credentialed leaders of the Pharisees. There was probably a reason why it was these people that were selected on this particular occasion. Indeed, there was a method to the madness. This whole exercise, from the standpoint of the Pharisees and these disciples and the Herodians, is going to be masked in deceit. And they want to portray that these representatives are going to Jesus to ask a very legitimate, innocent, innocuous type question. And they probably have a greater opportunity to give that impression if they are using Pharisee leader wannabes rather than fully fledged leaders of the Pharisees. Now, it's interesting that it's these two groups that have come together, collaborating in this exercise, the Pharisees and the Herodians. In fact, if it wasn't so serious, we'd actually find it somewhat humorous. Find it humorous that these two groups have now come together in this matter of trying to put Jesus on the hot seat and to undermine his credibility. You see, these are two groups who would normally not be united together. No love lost between these two groups of people. It might be something similar in our time, in our context, of having representatives of those who are on the far left coming together with those on the extreme far right and having some initiative that gives them a basis or legitimacy for working together. It may be like a group of environmentalists coming together with executives of the rich oil refinery companies, and somehow there's a way in which they can participate together. That's the kind of thing that we have going on here with the Herodians and the Pharisees. The Pharisees were this sect of Judaism who politically stood in firm opposition to the rule of Rome. In fact, they longed for the day when Roman occupation would be no more, when the power and the grip of Rome would be overthrown. The Herodians, on the other hand, they were those who were representatives of the Herodian dynasty. They supported the rule of Rome. They were okay with the status quo. They were pro. And so we have these two groups, but powerful groups of leaders among the Jewish people. And even though they're on the opposite sides, ends of the theological spectrum within Judaism in many respects, their shared desire here to turn the tables on Jesus, to expose him, to make him look silly, to somehow trip him up. That agenda item was sufficient for them to set aside their lesser respective agendas. And so they come to Jesus. And in the latter part of verse 16, they engage in some flattery. They say to him, teacher, word for rabbi. They really don't believe that he's a fully credentialed rabbi, but they'll use the term. We know that you are true and teach the way of God truthfully. And you do not care about anyone's opinion, for you are not swayed by appearances. And then they hit him. They hit him with the great political hot potato question. That question that's designed to make him pick sides. A question that's designed to place him in this very awkward spot. And so they say in verse 17, tell us then what you think. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Now, on the surface, that may appear as an innocent enough question. There were different views within Judaism, so it seems like a fair question on the surface. But Matthew, as the narrator, as we've already indicated, has already set the stage for us, exposing what is the desire of their hearts, their motives. They want to plot against Jesus. Is it right to pay taxes to Caesar, Lord, or not? Are we legally required to pay those taxes? Tax in question is probably the annual head tax, tax that was based on a census that would be determined by Israel's population as confirmed by Rome. Not the same biblically mandated temple tax that we've looked at earlier, where miraculously the coin was found in the fish's mouth that Peter caught. It's not that kind of tax that we're talking about. It's probably this head tax or some other general tax. It's not as if there weren't lots of taxes that could be in focus here. The Israelites were under this incredibly heavy tax burden. It was that heavy taxation that kept the empire going. Some estimate that the tax burden for a Jewish family was somewhere to 49 to 50% of their annual income. And every time they had to pay tax, they were reminded they're under the oppression of Rome. Some refused to pay it. Others, they were okay with the arrangement. But the question is designed to make Jesus take sides. They want to drag Jesus into this political, theological controversy. Some things are not new, right? You want controversy, you want debate, politics will do it. You want controversy, you want debate, theology will do it. And here they want Jesus to wade into this political, theological shark tank and put him in the tough spot. How's he going to answer? I'm going to put him in this no-win situation. If he votes in favor of paying the tax, he'll make the Pharisees angry and other Jewish nationalists, make them angry. They'll see Jesus as a traitor. They want to be done with the power of Rome. And after all, the expectation was that Jesus was going to come and set up a physical kingdom, that Rome would no longer be ruling over them. In their minds, that's what Jesus was going to come to do. So they're all for overthrow Rome, set up your kingdom. So if he says you pay taxes, they're not going to be too impressed with that. They're going to view him as a traitor. On the other hand, if he tells them that no, they should not pay the tax, and that word gets reported back to the Roman authorities, which it will, they will regard him now as an insurrectionist, troublemaker who's agitating and stirring up trouble in the empire. And we know how the Romans handled those kinds of people. Tended not to go well. And so they asked the question, should we pay taxes to Caesar or not? Can you picture it in your mind as they've lobbed this grenade question? Perhaps you see it in their faces, quite pleased with themselves. It's kind of like a so there kind of moment. What are you going to do with that one? Gotcha, don't we? But not so fast. Not so fast. It's not necessarily as tight of a tight spot as you might think. And the reason for that is actually twofold. Ultimately, of course, it all comes back to Jesus and who he is and his person and his identity. So Matthew, the storyteller, gives us another inside detail in verse 18 when it says, "But Jesus, aware of their malice." Jesus aware of their ill motives. Jesus aware of what they're up to. Jesus aware that this was not just an innocent, innocuous type question. Now it begs the question, doesn't it? How did he know? How did he know that? Was it just a premonition? Was it just that he has good emotional intelligence? Was able to read the body language? No, of course, it was none of those reasons. He knows it because of who he is, that he's God. And God knows all things. It's part of the irony of it all. It's part of the folly of it all. For these individuals to actually think that they can trip him up and trick him. Jesus sees right through the facade and he calls them out on it. And we see that as we come to the end of verse 18. And he says, "Why put me to the test, you hypocrites?" Here they are engaged in this elaborate scheme and trying to have everything just so that they can pretend that they're serious. And Jesus just cuts through it like a hot knife and butter and just exposes them for what's going on. "Why put me to the test, you hypocrites?" Ouch. Ouch. Can you imagine the surprise in their response? Do you think that might have jolted them just a little bit? Might they have thought to themselves, how does he know that? Who tipped him off? Do we have a mole in here? And then as we come to verse 19, rather than being on the receiving end of this exchange, Jesus takes the offensive. And he says in verse 19, "Show me the coin for the tax. Bring me that coin that you pay the tax with." And they brought him a denarius. And now with that coin in hand, Jesus is going to answer their question with a question of his own. Jesus, of course, is the great master teacher, isn't he? He specializes in this. You ask him a question, he answers your question with a question of his own. These questioners, when they brought this question to Jesus, should we pay tax to Caesar or not? They were just expecting a yes or no answer. But Jesus is going to take this conversation in a different direction. The denarius was a silver coin. And on that coin was an image of Tiberius Caesar. This isn't a denarius. This is good Canadian coinage right here. This is our toonie, okay? But it's silver. And it has an image on it. And it reminds us that, we belong to the monarchy. It has Queen Elizabeth II on there. And there's some inscriptions on there. While they bring the coin, this denarius, to Jesus. And on that coin, there is this inscription of Caesar, or this image of Caesar. And then there is also this inscription that reads, "The emperor," or something like this, "The emperor is the king, the Son of God, and the high priest." And so Jesus, directing their attention to that coin, he says to them, whose likeness and whose inscription is on that? Whose image, whose portrait do you see there? Easy enough question to answer, rather. It's Caesar's. And then Jesus gives the punchline, which comes before us in the last part of verse 21. And he says, therefore, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. This response surprises the questioners. Like I said, they would have been expecting a yes or no answer. Jesus, of course, throughout his ministry, has befriended tax collectors. Jesus isn't afraid of tax collectors. Matthew was one of those. Zacchaeus was another. And so some might have thought that that's where he would throw in his affirmation. And in so doing, upset the Pharisees and other nationalistic Jews. On the other hand, Jesus throughout his ministry has been affirming that he is the Messiah. He's even received messianic praise. And so from that perspective, a negative answer would have been expected by some. No, you don't acknowledge Rome. And this human emperor who claimed to be God and high priest, you don't acknowledge that. And of course, if Jesus had said that, then he would have been guilty of fostering insurrection. And so in summary, the Herodians were probably anticipating a positive answer. Yes, you give to Rome. And the Pharisees, a negative answer. But neither precisely get what they are expecting to hear. But instead, Jesus says, give to Caesar what's Caesar's, and give to God what's God's. When he says give to Caesar what's Caesar, the implication is that since the Jews were under the government of Rome, under the rule of Caesar, there was a responsibility and an obligation that came with that, even if the regime was corrupt and pagan and evil. Jesus here, in that response, is letting his listeners and these original readers of the text in on a profound insight. And then he's highlighting that his role at this particular point in time in God's divine program, first and foremost, that he has not come to establish a political and a military threat to the established leaders of the world. He has come to bring something different. His kingdom will be a counter-revolutionary kingdom. And he calls people to come and follow him, to embrace him. And those who are currently part of his kingdom will live in a way that acknowledges the realities that they have current obligations to the authorities under which they are living. That, of course, is not a radical concept to us as we sit here today. It gets fleshed out later in the teaching of New Testament epistles, where we are taught that governments are authorities that are established by God. The injunction that we get is that we are to pray for those who are our rulers, that we are to live as model citizens, and that we are to render obedience, so long as what we are commanded to do does not run contrary to the commands of God. And oh yes, by the way, that does mean that we pay taxes. We might have wished that Jesus had have aligned with those who said no taxes. He doesn't do that. And that part of our responsibility as followers of Jesus, living faithfully as those who are part of the kingdom, is that we fulfill the obligations. Render to Caesar what's Caesar's. But that's not all that the Lord has to say. Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's. Then he says, render to God the things that are God's. And there are some subtle and not so subtle claims that the Lord is making when he gives the second part of the statement. Caesar's image is obviously on the coin, and he's entitled to that which bears his image. In this case, money. Now, as a citizen under the rule of Rome, Caesar's entitled to more than money, but certainly nothing less. His image on the coin confirms that. But what Caesar is limited to, what he's limited to lay claim to, is not what he is affirming. He can levy taxes, and there can be other obligations, but his power, his domain, is not limitless. He has a domain, but it is limited. His image might be on that coin. That's true. There might be an inscription on that coin, but what that inscription says is not true. Caesar might be emperor. He is not God. Caesar, he is emperor. He is not high priest. He is not deity. Herodians, he is not one who is worthy of one to whom you would sell your soul. That is not him. Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's. Whose image is on the coin? Caesar. But render to God the things that are God's. Whose image is on you? Herodians? Pharisees? Whose image do you bear? This morning, whose stamp, whose inscription is on us, each of us? Of course, each of us as humans, we bear the imprint, we bear the image of God. Each of us are created in the image of God. And as such, our deepest loyalty, our devotion, our commitment that belongs to God is that which is supreme. He's the one who's to be the recipient of our ultimate and total commitment. And God is the creator over all, sovereign over all creation and everything within it. He is sovereign even over Caesar. It's not that there are two domains, God's domain and Caesar's domain, and never the twain shall meet, that we keep everything separate. No, God is the one who is Lord over all. He is the one who is supreme over all. All things spiritual, all things physical, all things political, all things temporal, all things eternal. He is supreme over it all. And so he reminds these people through his object lesson and the punchline that flows from it. You give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, but there is a higher calling on your life for each of you. Don't sell your soul to the emperor. He's not worthy of your total devotion. Your soul belongs to God. His image is stamped on your heart and on your soul. And I believe there's yet another angle or another layer to this instruction which Jesus gives when he says, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar and render to God the things that are God's. What has Jesus been doing throughout his ministry and that Matthew has been recording as developing as this great theme of this gospel account? He's been developing this idea and affirming that he is the Messiah, that he is the long-awaited deliverer, that he is king, that he is the sovereign one. And when Jesus gives the object lessons from that coin, and as he says, whose image does this coin bear? The easy answer is Caesar. And he says, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and give to God what is God's. He's been appealing to them throughout, for them to acknowledge him for who he is, that he is deity, that he is Messiah, that he is the Son of God. And just as that coin bears the image of Caesar, so Jesus himself bears the image of God. Whose imprint is on that coin? Caesar. Whose imprint is on me? God. Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and render to God, to moi, me, the things that are God's. The writer to the Hebrews, and we're going to go there in communion, says it like this. Long ago, and at many times, and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets, but in these last days has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, through whom also he created the world. He is the radiance of the glory of God, and get it? And the exact imprint of his nature. The exact representation of his nature. Some of the other translations capture it that way. The Apostle Paul in Colossians 1:15 will tell us that Jesus is the image of the invisible God. Jesus, in speaking to Philip, says, "Whoever has seen me has seen the Father." The coin, whose image does it bear? Who's the imprint there? Caesar. Jesus is the image, the imprint of God. Render to God, render to me the things that are God's. In this exchange, what started out so optimistically for these questioners ends up where neither of them intended to be, because neither of them get what they were expecting. In hopes that Jesus would feel the pressure and would do something to hurt his cause, he actually leaves them dumbfounded. The anti-Rome, anti-Herod Pharisees are told to pay taxes to the Roman government. The pro-Herod, pro-Rome Herodians are reminded that their supreme allegiance is not to the emperor, but rather to God. Both groups are reminded that the designated inscription on the coin is wrong. Caesar is not God, and neither is he high priest. Jesus does not support the Pharisees by opposing Caesar's tax, and neither does he support the Herodians by affirming total loyalty to Rome. Instead, Jesus teaches them that when we honor Jesus as supreme in all things, we honor him in everything, including the government of Rome and the emperor. Neither groups get what they anticipate. Instead, verse 22 reminds us, when they heard it, they marveled, and they left him and went away. They're silenced. The questioners marvel. They are amazed, but unfortunately, not transformed. They're not transformed because of the hardness of their heart. We see that these people are not transformed because the confrontations will continue. Silenced, marveled, amazed, but unfortunately, not moved. And they're not moved because their heart is hard. The hardness of our human hearts gets exposed through the folly of resisting Jesus. We see the irony of it all, that they think, as I mentioned, that they can actually trick Jesus. That they can come with a hidden agenda, as it were, but they're dealing with one who knows it all. There's nothing hidden from him with whom we have to do. It's a little reminiscent of Psalm 2. The psalmist says, "Why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us burst their bonds apart and cast away their cords from us." The nations get together and say, let's take on God. Verse 4, "He who sits in heavens laughs." The irony of it all. The hardness of our heart can get exposed through the folly of resisting the one who himself is God. It's a reminder for us this morning, wherever we find ourselves on the spiritual journey. Some here, some listening online, watching, may not yet be followers of Jesus, and you're just checking everything out, and we're glad that you're here, and we welcome you to do that. But there is a solemn reminder to us that as we do that, we are engaged with hearts that are hard, with eyes that are glazed over to the realities of spiritual truth. And there is a great risk of the hardness of our heart getting exposed by resisting the very one who came to rescue us. Ask God to soften your heart. Ask God to open those eyes so that we see him for who he truly is. We're reminded in our passage that we are to honor the Lord as we honor those who have the rule over us. And that includes many things. And yes, even our taxes. We might find that easier to do in a country of affluence and in a country where we have freedom of movement and freedom to gather in the way in which we do. But for most of the church this morning, that's not their experience. That's not what they get to engage in day out, day in and day out. For much of the church today find themselves in oppressive, hostile regimes when it comes to them and the expression of their faith. They have much to teach us in relation to how do we do that. That too was the experience of the early church. They have much to teach us in relation to how do we live for the Lord within the context of an oppressive rule. In the 2nd century of Christianity, a letter known as an Epistle to Diognetus was written to a high-ranking Roman official. And in the letter, the author, who is unknown, is responding to an inquiry from the Roman official concerning who are the Christians, how do they live, and how do they function in society. And he writes in part, now this is in the language of the time, he writes and he says, Christians are not distinguished from the rest of mankind by either country, speech, or customs. The fact is, they nowhere settle in cities of their own. They use no peculiar language. They cultivate no eccentric mode of life. Certainly, this creed of theirs is no discovery due to some fancy or speculation of inquisitive men, nor do they, as some do, champion a doctrine of human origin. That is, they don't pretend to be better than others, special species. Yet while they dwelled in both Greek and non-Greek cities, as each one's lot was cast, and conformed to the customs of the country in dress, food, and mode of life in general, the whole tenor of their way of living stamps it as worthy of admiration and admittedly extraordinary. They reside in their respective countries, not only as aliens, but only as aliens. They take part in everything as citizens and put up with everything as foreigners. Every foreign land is their home, and every home a foreign land. They marry like others and beget children, but they do not expose their offspring. Their board they spread for all, but not their bed. That is, contrary to pagan belief, the sharing of common meals were not occasions to engage in sexual immoralities. But they are hospitable. They find themselves in the flesh, but do not live according to the flesh. They spend their days on earth, but hold citizenship in heaven. They obey the established laws, but in their private lives, they rise above the laws. They love all men, but are persecuted by all. They are unknown, yet are condemned. They are put to death, but it is life that they receive. They are poor and enriched man. Destitute of everything, they abound in everything. They are dishonored, and in their dishonor find their glory. They are calumniated, that is slandered, and are vindicated. They are reviled, and they bless. They are insulted, and render honor. Doing good, they are penalized as evildoers. When penalized, they rejoice, because they are quickened into life. The Jews make war on them as foreigners. The Greeks persecute them, and those who hate them are at a loss to explain their hatred. Cole gives us a powerful glimpse into how these Christians in the first century lived. Obviously, evangelism and teaching were significant to their spreading the Christian faith, but today we come to the understanding that it was the lifestyle of these early Christians that influenced most. It was the manner in which they lived that gave them the platform to communicate the gospel, the message, the way they did. They did not occupy the influential seats of power in the center of their culture. They lived life from the margins. And from the margins, they infiltrated and influenced life and society in a disproportionate way. They were able to do that because of the way in which they lived. Because when we honor Jesus as supreme in all things, he is honored in everything. We are to do that this morning. That's our calling. We are to honor Jesus as supreme. Jesus is to be supreme in our allegiance because he's created us for himself. This morning we find value and dignity in the fact that each of us are created in the image of God. Being created in the image of God has lots of implications, but there's no greater implication than the fact that God has created you and that he has created me for relationship with himself. He's worthy of our supreme honor, our faithful, loyal allegiance. The temptation, of course, is for us to give other things in life greater priority. Other things, other relationships. For the Herodians, it was the Roman government. They put all their eggs in that basket. For us this morning, it's probably not the government. But it can be a host of other things that get the priority in our allegiance. It can be our careers, our material investments, our family, our academic achievements, even our ministries. These are things to which we devote ourselves to as if they are supreme. We sell our soul. They are our allegiance. And this morning gives us the opportunity, as we head into a new week, to reflect. Who is it? Or what is it that holds my supreme allegiance? Who was it? What was it that captured my allegiance last week? Is it Jesus? Is it something else? Is it someone else? We have lots of responsibilities in life, lots of relationships in life, and we're accountable to God for all of those. And our passage encourages us and reminds us this morning that when we honor Jesus as supreme in all things, we honor him in everything. Father, that's our desire as followers of yours, followers of Jesus this morning. Will you help us? Will you help us with our allegiance? That our allegiance to you, O God, and our allegiance to your Son would be supreme. And when that allegiance is proper, is right, then we'll honor you in everything else. Help us to do that this week for your glory, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen.